Hi folks, Dave, the Honest Audiophile. This is the Clavelon Delta, and these are my Honest Audiophile impressions. I want to thank Linsoul Audio for providing the Clavelon Delta for review. Do greatly appreciate it. Linsoul Audio, you rock. Alright, so the Clavelon Delta, this will set you back $100 from your bank account. It is a single dynamic. It also has a very unique design. It's kind of based off of Cyberpunk. So if you're into a Cyberpunk type of designing and you like all those little gadgets and things, the Clavelon Delta may be something to look into. It has 18 ohms of impedance, 119 decibels of sensitivity, and a frequency response range of 10 hertz to 28 kilohertz. The Clavelon Delta comes in this unique box. You get all these little pictures on the front and on the back and on the sides. It's all over the place. And when you take off the top, you're greeted by an area for the IEMs to sit and accessories. And the accessories are very limited. There's another little area here. And so kind of an uninspiring unboxing other than the outer box is kind of cool. The one nice accessory that you get is this little case that has small, medium, and large tips. I did use the stock tips. They included an extra set that was installed on them. They're your typical grape-shaped tip. Nothing too special here, but they are very comfortable and they fit me very well. So that's what I used. And then the other accessory that you get is the cable that comes with it. There is no carrying case, no extra tips, nothing of the sort that comes with the Delta. It's just those tips and this cable, which connects with 2-pin. And it's not my favorite cable. It has this weird rubbery type of feel to it, and it tangles very easily. The ear hooks are not very well controlled. They have nice tension to them, but they kind of just are springy and wobbly around at times. And then you have this nice split with a cinch that does stay in place for the most part. It'll get loose over time. Then a nice braid, and it terminates into a 3.5. Overall, it's not a terrible cable, but it's not very controllable, and it just kind of is annoying because you have to untangle it every single time, and these ear hooks just kind of eh. Talking about the shell, so you got a little bit of branding. On the left side says Clavelon, and then on the right shell you have the logo of the brand. The Delta is somewhat thick, does have that step type of design going up with a very aggressive angle for the nozzle. And the nozzle is somewhat short. Another thing to note is on the faceplate, it does not lay flush to the rest of the body, and there are these little edges around the top, and even though it's somewhat rounded a little bit, it's still somewhat sharp to the ears, and I find it to be not very comfortable to wear. And we'll talk about that here in a moment because of that weird edge that is on the shell. Overall, the shells are fairly well built. They feel durable, nice and metal build. I have no problems with the build quality of them. Design issue definitely could be a problem for some, and as already hinted at, is a problem for me. As you can see, there's that step up. There's no other ergonomics, and where it steps up, it's rather short back here. So it's going to be kind of picky. And then it's a little bit on the high side, so it's going to cause some fit issues for people. Putting it in your ears, they do not fit very well. They're kind of an awkward fit for me, and that edge on the faceplate rests right here on this part of my ear, and it kind of cuts in, and it makes it very, very uncomfortable to wear. Putting them in my ears, you actually get halfway decent isolation of outside noises, probably about 66% of outside noises being blocked. I found that these do a good job in that regard. The only things I really heard around the house were very loud things like coffee grinders and vacuum cleaners. Around the neighborhood, same thing, louder vehicles, loud trucks, buses, and things like that. Carrying on a conversation is difficult. If the person talks really loud, you might be able to hear them, but it would be better if you popped out in IEM to listen to the conversation. Comfort-wise, these things are not comfortable for me at all. After about 15 minutes, that really becomes annoying, and the faceplate touching my ear there, and it becomes painful if I listen to it for longer. So I did several listening sessions with these for several hours, and I forced myself to have them in my ears for longer than 15 minutes, and it was very, very painful, to the point where one day I had to take the next day off from listening to IEMs because it hurt so bad. These things are not comfortable at all for me. The Clavelon Delta is fairly easy to drive, 18 ohms of impedance, 119 decibels sensitivity. I found that even the lowest power dongles that I have were able to get these things extremely loud and sounded very good. Something like a periodic audio Rhodium paired very nicely with the Delta, and I had no issues and barely had to go up on the volume. They do respond a little bit better to a little bit more power, but it's not something that's going to make them into a game changer and become a giant killer. But they do scale a little bit with a little bit extra oomph. Overall, I found that they always kind of had a warmer sound signature no matter what you paired it with. But if you paired it with a super warm source, they become a little bit bloated and sound somewhat on the lackadaisical side, and do not really do a good job of giving clarity. So be careful what you pair it with. If you put it with a more colder source or something that really has a little bit thinner of a sound to it and maybe a little bit more airiness, it brings out the Delta a little bit better and opens it up so it's not as stuffy sounding as it is on a warmer source. The Clavelon Delta, how does it sound? So the bass of the Delta has a nice fun sound. It's not the most impactful and the biggest, grandest, most type of sound, but you are going to get some rumble and grumble, and it is quite noticeable. It has a nice presence to it, extends okay into the sub bass, gives you that rumble and grumble, and then the mid bass is more of the focus, and you get very nice impact, punch, and slam. And there's an okay amount of texture. It's not the most texturized and engaging type of basses, but it's not boring sounding either. It really does a decent job of keeping the toes tapping without being excessive and without being boring. Upper bass bleeds into the lower mids a little bit, adding in some warmth, and a little bit at times when you use a warmer source, it will sound a little bit bloated and a little bit too fat. But overall, I find that the bass has decent amount of detail retrieval and resolution, and it's very competent in that regard for its price point. Tone and timbre also sounds very good. Moving into the mids, the lower mids have a nice presence about them, a little bit of fullness and thickness to them, and then the upper mids are very much elevated. They have a forward presence when it comes to the upper mids, and at times they can sound a bit shouty, and it does thin out a little bit. So if you're listening through the octaves of a piano, a guitar, strings, brass instruments, woodwind instruments, they'll sound a little bit more full body and have a little bit more of a warmness to it. And then when you get into the upper mids, they thin out slightly and have a little bit more of a bite and an edge and a little bit more crispness to them while still maintaining that warmth. So they're not quite even and cohesive through the mids, but overall they sound fairly natural. The upper mids can at times sound a little bit unnatural, like they're being a little bit too forced and a little bit too pushed. Detail retrieval and resolution is like the bass, very competent, but not anything world bashing here. Going into the treble has a little bit of bite on the lower end, and as you extend it out, it becomes very laid back and a little bit on the lush, warm, rounded side of things. So the The treble can sound boring at times and just sound like it doesn't have a lot of energy, a lot of sparkle, and a lot of bite to it. I do wish that there was more of it extended out. Now, the lower treble has that, and at times it can be a little bit too pushed. Just like the upper mids, the lower treble region has a little bit extra zing to it, and it sounds a little too exuberant. So detail retrieval and resolution in the treble is okay. Resolution does struggle in the lower mids and in the lower treble and upper mids regions, as it doesn't sound quite as refined as the rest of the mix. And I also find that the tone and timbre also sounds a little bit off at times, especially in that lower treble where it's a little bit too pushed. Overall, the bass, the mids, and the treble are a kind of a hodgepodge of mixtures. You get that nice warmth all throughout, but at the same time, it sounds a little bit thick and full in certain areas and a little bit thinner in others, like the upper mids and lower treble regions. So it's kind of unique when you're listening to the octaves all the way throughout. It doesn't quite sound as cohesive and as balanced, but it is a very musical sound. Soundstage of the Delta is actually quite impressive. I was rather impressed at how wide it can get and how it places things. It actually does really good in regards to that. You can notice things behind you and around you and moving, and live recordings sound very good. It does a really good job of spacing out and showing the differences in seating arrangements. It's not the deepest of stages, but for the price point, it is pretty good, and you can look in and do a little bit of nitpicking. As far as layering goes, it does a good job of keeping things separated. For the most part, it does get a little bit confused and a little convoluted when it comes to a bassier, heavier hitting and more complex type of tracks, especially with sources that are on the warmer side. And then the imaging from side to side and placement in that regard is pretty good. It's a lot over in this neighborhood and in this neighborhood, and you can follow and track things around. Detail retrieval and resolution is also pretty good for the price point. It's not the most detailed, but you're not going to really miss anything, but you definitely aren't going to be exploring new things. And then the resolution is okay in the bass. It's not anything special, but it's not too bad. It's fairly well controlled. But when you get into the uppers, especially upper mids and lower treble regions, the resolution kind of takes a little bit of a hit, and it becomes a little bit grainy, a little bit grimy, and at times harsh and glary depending on where it hits. So it's not the most refined, defined, and focused sound. Tone and timbre. Tone and timbre sounds fairly natural throughout, but where the bass is, the upper bass and lower mids come together, at times it can sound a little bit too thick and a little too fat. And then in the upper mids and lower treble regions, it sounds a little bit too forced and a little bit too thin. Overall, the Clavelon Delta, I don't mind it. It's a musical listen, but it's not really anything super special in my opinion. A IEM that comes in a few dollars cheaper, that in my opinion is just an overall better sound, is the Tanchjim 4U. And the Tanchjim 4U has different little filters that you can change out. And in my opinion, the Tanchjim 4U has a more open sound, does better with spacing, better with imaging, and also is a little bit more detailed and resolving. And even though the Tanchjim 4U doesn't have as much bass and isn't quite as warm sounding, the Tanchjim 4U to me is the more refined, defined, and focused sound. It has a more accurate tone and timbre, with the mids and the treble being better controlled, and the sound stage has a little bit more depth and a little bit better placement and accuracy. So if you're looking for something like the Tanchjim 4U, but has more bass and a little bit more warm of a sound signature, and isn't quite as much of a technical monitor sound, then the Clavelon Delta may be something to consider. But for me, I'm going to stick with the Tanchjim 4U. The Clavelon Delta, it's an okay listen, something unique and different. I just wish it was more comfortable. It's been Dave, the Honest Audiophile. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you on the next video. Speaking of next videos, somewhere on the screen, subscription links and notification bells. If you haven't already, please check those off. Don't forget to give a thumbs up or a thumbs down to the video, and check out all the links down below. There's all kinds of information down there regarding how you can contact channel, follow channel, support channel. Speaking of supporting the channel, I want to thank my supporters through Patreon and YouTube memberships. Thank you very much for all that you give. And I also don't want to forget all of you who give one-time gifts. That also is very much appreciated. If you're interested in supporting the channel, you can do that through one-time gifts, PayPal, Venmo, YouTube, or you can support the channel with monthly subscriptions with Patreon and YouTube memberships, and you can get a little bit extra benefits like early access to videos and access to some private lounges on my Discord server. So if you're interested in supporting my channel, I do greatly appreciate it, and check out the links down below. Speaking of my Discord server, there's a link there. It's open to the public, so feel free to click that and join in on the fun and have some easier access to me directly. Anyway, so down below also there's all kinds of other information, music recommendations, gear recommendations, and all sorts of other things are listed down below, so don't forget to check out those links. And lastly, don't forget to enjoy the music, and that honesty is the best policy.